Tuesday, November 19th, 2022. And I'd ask you all to turn your phones off as this meeting is being recorded. Ellen, would you do the roll call, please?
Yes, Chairperson. Thank you, everyone. And just a second. I'm going to get my list. Ms. Callan Carson?
Here.
Mr. Carey?
Present.
Mrs. DeRoberts?
Here.
Hernandez Williams? Here. Mr. Riley?
Here.
Ms. Walters?
Present.
Mr. Weiner?
Here.
Vice Chair Mr. Lacavoli?
Here.
And Chairperson Granato?
Present.
All present.
And thank you, everyone, for being here. We'd like to do the Pledge of Allegiance, and because I spotted Sally Katz, she's going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you. We'll get started on this special meeting. We have it's one big presentation, but two presentations here, and we have TSKP here to lead us in discussion of financial impact of maintaining current status of elementary schools.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm Michael Scott with TSKP Studio. I'm joined here tonight by Randall Luther, the managing partner, and Mary Lynn Raddick, our project architect. Also from our team is Tom Romagnoli from Downs Construction. They are helping us keep our numbers realistic. Tom's also a resident of the town, so he's my inside man. I'd also real quick like to thank and appreciate the members of the building committee that are here tonight. If you just wave your hands. Thank you all very much. I'm going to present all the information at once.
Okay.
We're just going to go through it. We've been on the job since the last week of September, so we're a couple months in, and I think you'll see that we're moving pretty fast, not in coming to grand conclusions, but on gathering the information and the tools that we will need to advise the building committee on a comprehensive elementary school plan. This will be a lot of information, and so I think it will be easiest if you ask questions along the way. So feel free to indicate a question, and if it's on the next slide, I'll simply tell you that, and we'll just keep moving, okay? So what I'm going to talk to you tonight about is first where we are as consultants to the building committee, where we are in the process. And I'm going to update you on the community outreach to date. And then I'm going to refer you to the website as an important tool to this referendum process. It's going to be a great resource as we start to generate more decisive material. Then I'm going to go through what we said was going to be a baseline of, given the current status of your schools, since the last unsuccessful referendum, doing nothing really isn't an option. So what is the minimum that you would have to do just to keep school buses coming up to that building? And we'll go through how we looked at that, and then we'll tell you what it means on a school-by-school basis. And then lastly, we'll start to talk about some opportunities and constraints that as professionals we feel are intrinsic on each of these elementary school sites. In other words, just the physical disposition of both the buildings and these sites already tell us a lot about what are the possibilities moving forward. So schedule. As I said, we were hired the last week of September. It's now already November, and the building committee is eager to consolidate the information and hone in on your best plan forward sometime in the first quarter of next year. So they have us moving quickly, and so far we're able to respond to that. Just to be clear, so far with the building committee, we've identified that baseline maintain-only budget, just as a new floor, something other than $0. What is the minimum amount you would have to spend? And we've presented this opportunity and constraint analysis to them. And that's why we're before you today, because you're an important part of this process and we don't want to get too far ahead of you. So we're looking for your input and comments as we go. What we would like to do from our opportunity and constraint analysis is to dig deeper in some of the scenarios that come off of that. And we will continue to refine that with the building committee until it gels into a solution or option of solutions that make sense that we can then come back to you and report on a formal recommendation. So there you are, the big blue star. We've done a fair amount of public outreach. Tom lives in this community, but for other of us that aren't fortunate to be Wethersfield residents, it's been a bit of a jumping into the deep end. We've met with all of your PTOs. We've met with the public schools professional staff, Chamber of Commerce, a subset of your safety and security. That's your fire marshal, police department, your school safety director, as well as the early childhood program directors, some of the grassroots Facebook groups. We had a very good public session here in this room last night where the general public was invited to make comments. And we're just came fresh off of a good discussion about educational specification and program options with your professional staff. Tomorrow we'll meet with the seniors at the senior center, and we'll follow up with that professional team that's working on their fact-finding to compare notes, see if we can find some serendipity between those programs.
Michael,
Yes,
is this how you want us to interact
that's
during
an
the
excellent
presentation?
way. Very good.
Okay,
so far.
thank you. So I know that you've gotten recommendations for the different groups to meet with. I see moms of Wethersfield. I think we have dads of Wethersfield representative. Has everyone, like, how did you pick, some of the more specific groups? I'm just wondering, I want to make sure that we don't constrain you with the number of groups to look at, however.
We'll pretty much meet with anyone
Who reaches
want.
out, okay.
As a fellow dad, I will just advise you that the dads are a far more itinerant group than the moms, so we're having trouble corralling them in one spot. But
You have
we'd
a
be-
member who can help?
Okay, very good.
No comment.
Thank you.
I say that with a lot of sympathy because I'm right there with you, man. Okay. Almost immediately, right on the heels of Cornfest, the building committee set up a website that we intend to continue to populate with information as it's generated. It's been a slow ramp up because, as I said, we've been mostly on listening tours. But I would just like to highlight a few features of the website currently. All of the brochures that were put together prior to the August walkthroughs that Wethersfield Public School organized, those have been posted as a PDF. But I think the most important feature of the website is a section where people can ask any question or make any comment, and then under the FAQs, those comments are responded to by the building committee. So that as we've gotten out and done increasingly more outreach, we're getting better traffic on the comments. But it's a good way for people who can't make the building committee meetings to be able to correspond with this process. Maintain only estimate. So I just want to go back and restate why we're doing this. Obviously, when you tour your current elementary schools, spending $0 is not an option. So the idea that you can continue to do nothing, I feel like you're really at a tipping point now across all 5 sites. So what we were able to do was, because of your previous efforts done by both the school facilities group and the town facility group, there is an abundance of data about contemplated repairs and the conditions of these schools. We went through that list, and with Downs Construction, who builds and renovates schools every day of their life, and TSKP, who does the same on the design side, we walked through and vetted that list to see that we agreed that the list was, one, current, that there wasn't interim repairs that were due, and two, that the recommended repairs met a certain level of priority, that it's something that you would really need to do in order to, it would be in your best interest to do in the next 5 to 10 years in order to keep kids coming to that building. From there, we sat with Downs and calibrated essentially what is a cost of work really for that repair. And from that, we drew on our wealth of experience of school construction projects that Downs is either actively constructing right now or bidding right now, or that we have in design and we're having estimated. We adjusted those costs to from a trade cost to a construction cost, and that may be a term of art for people who aren't familiar with the construction process, but you must be aware that if you hire a roofer, you pay one price, but if you hire a constructor to do a range of repairs, you will have to, you pay for that coordinating service to make sure that the work is done in an orderly fashion and you don't have tradespeople working on top of each other or actively undoing new work that you just put into place. And then lastly, we took any numbers from the old estimates and we made sure that they reflected current 2024 pricing. Lastly, we took all of that as a bundle of work and we said, okay, in reality, the town of Wethersfield isn't going to perform this work in 2024. And in fact, if you think about it, if you were going to systematically do the minimum repairs across 5 sites, that's going to take you time to do. You can't, with kids in the building, just summarily do all of that work. So we escalated it out 3.5 years, which is a midpoint to where we think that program could land. We also included contingencies, because even though we do this every day and Downs does this every day, we don't necessarily see everything when we walk through the school. These were not destructive tests or probing that we did. We just put a good pair of eyes on it. And we included a series of soft costs. And again, that may be a term of art, but you may also realize that if you need a roof repair as a single item, you may be able to hire a roofer to do it in isolation. But if you're going to systematically do a series of repairs across all 5 schools, you're likely going to have to hire a professional like myself who will charge fees. You will have insurance and everything else on that to do that work. The very last thing that we did is we looked through that list of repairs that you must do and said, well, the state is highly motivated to be a partner with you on many of these repairs. And we tried to calibrate what the state would be willing to participate if you did these repairs ad hoc outside of a full school construction grant endeavor. The state, just so you know, is incentivized to help districts replace roofs, do security improvements, do window replacements. A lot of the indoor air quality grants have expired as we've pushed through that COVID piece. But nevertheless, what we then did was try to develop a total cost to the town for each of the schools, and then ultimately a cost to the town to do all 5 schools. I'm going to move now through the schools very quickly. Oh, no. Let me just drill into a little more detail just so you can understand how we approach this. Not to pick on Emerson Williams, but you can see here in isolation, after walking through Emerson Williams, in the upper left-hand corner, here are the series of repairs that we would recommend to the exterior shell, along with the costings. We did that for entire sections of Emerson Williams, exterior shell, interior shell. You can see that in the upper right-hand corner, and then ultimately developed a total number.
Can you go back one slide?
Yes, please.
I see that, do you have a total? It's always so helpful, and anytime we're looking at numbers, to have a total of the total. If that can be something
I'll have
can-
that at the very last slide.
Couple more slides.
Okay, great. And we look up in the corner, Wethersfield.
Oh, yeah, look at that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. We'll take a few points off for that. All right, so for Charles Wright, just looking at that building, the total for, just to keep students attending Charles Wright for the next 10 years, the town really should invest about $10.5 million into that school for deferred maintenance projects. And it's estimated that the state would participate about $1.5 million of that, for a total cost of about $9 million to the town for Charles Wright. Similar analysis of Emerson Williams is about $14.5 million of deferred maintenance, with $12.5 on Wethersfield taxpayers. Hamner is a little more than that, 14.75, with about, again, 12.5 to Wethersfield. Highcrest is 15.25. That's largely because it's a larger building rather than grossly deficient school, with $13 million total cost to Wethersfield. And Samuel Webb is one of the larger buildings, but it's in one of the better conditions. I think it benefited from the renovations that were done when it was switched over. So it's just under $12 million, with about $9.33 million cost to the town. The grand total of this is just under $67 million of deferred maintenance, which the state will participate in about 10.25, leaving a cost to the town of $56.53 million. So the town would have to bond the full $66.75. The state would put in their amount, and you could expect cost to the town around $56. I do want to point out a few things. This, again, is essentially, in our opinion, the floor that you need to spend on these 5 schools if you intend to send kids to them over the next 10 years. What do you get from this? You at least reset the clock on your major systems. In other words, as we move through, you know that all of the roofs got replaced, right? Because there is a pervasive issue with your roofs in all of your schools. And if you want the state to participate to the tune of 56 cents on the dollar, they will want you to do a full replacement rather than a patch and repair. And the mechanical systems get replaced. So where you have old boilers or old electrical panels, old switchgear, we are replacing that. So for this money, you at least reset the clock on that, and you would expect to get at least 20 years, if not longer, out of those major systems. But I would equally caution you that this does not add a single square foot of space. It does not add a single program to the building, and it doesn't add any equipment other than playgrounds that need to be replaced. It doesn't add any computers. It doesn't change the character of the school, and in fact, it really doesn't even repaint every wall. So when you spend this money and you send kids back to that school, it's going to look exactly like it was when they left. The asbestos tile will be pulled up, and there will be new tile there. The carpets where they are in the corridors will be pulled up and replaced, but there's very little change to the educational environment or, in fact, physical environment in the schools. Questions, thoughts, concerns? Okay. Let's talk about opportunities and constraints. First, I'm going to show you a really big spreadsheet with lots of colors that are starting to be holiday themed at this point in time. But what I want to do on this slide is just focus on the top of this spreadsheet, which are all the cells in white and yellow. And this is essentially just a snapshot of each school as captured by your 2023 enrollment study. In other words, we just put a glass bubble over everything, isolating variables, and just looked at more or less where you are today, not where you're going to be, but where you are today. You can see here what the enrollment in each of these schools was last academic year. You can see what the state grant thinks that school should be in its size based on that enrollment. And you can see at the very top what is the current square footage of each of those schools. Then the next series of white slides start to point at some interesting peaks in how each of the neighborhood districts have developed over time, and perhaps start to identify disparities in square foot per student or number of students per classroom in each of the schools. In other words, what we hear in our public outreach and what we see in the numbers is a tight range, but a range nevertheless that represents fundamentally different educational environments in a given classroom of a given age compared to either the mean or the far end of the other spectrum. So,
Michael?
yes.
Just to confirm for the public, I assume that the almost 20,000 square foot difference for Webb is from the cafeteria and the gym, the oversized gym, is
Well,
that?
To be clear, Webb in its DNA wants to be an intermediate school.
Right.
And intermediate schools automatically have more square footage than elementary schools because the kids move around and they have more robust programs, like a science room, which you wouldn't necessarily contemplate for an elementary school. The gyms are bigger, and that gym is the gym, and you have an auditorium. And the state really doesn't pay for auditoriums in elementary schools anymore. So the largest disparity there is really that. The other reason why it is so oversized is your student population is actually quite small at Webb. While you have an advantage of these great group assets, the individual classroom count and the size of the individual classrooms are quite small compared to the other schools in the district. So it's really exaggerated, right? It's got a lot of extra features, but it's got among the smallest populations of your schools. So
Because the population does not include pre-K, right?
we isolated the pre-K
did,
out of
okay.
this. Yes, that is true.
Thank you.
And, okay, good. That last cell down at the bottom does identify that many of these schools contain extra programs that the other schools don't have, which would be additional space and program requirements for that school, like the STRIVE program at Hamner, the LEAP program at Webb, as well as the pre-K program. Before I switch to the individual schools and start talking about the color diagram, I'd also like to point out that you're actually looking at 6 columns where we've identified what I've called the Hamner Annex. That's my terminology, but it would represent a swing site that we have identified as having some potential for future consideration as part of this program. And I'll get into that in more detail. Any more questions about the 2023 educational disposition of your elementary schools?
I do. Will we talk about like Hamner Annex, but I also will have a question about, did we look at, Keisha Farm? Would we talk about that when we get to
We will.
Highcrest?
We will
Okay.
talk about that.
Thank
I
you.
have one question,
Yes.
maybe to clarify for people watching this. When you think of the word deferred maintenance, what does that mean when it comes to schools and towns? And does it mean that we've just been horrible at maintaining our schools, or is it a common theme in all districts where there's buildings that just need a new roof over time, or the building gets tired, or there's just certain things, that big price items that
Okay.
every town has?
No, I think I understand the spirit of that comment. I commented to your public school professional staff that while personally I feel that Wethersfield is very special, it is not unique. Nevertheless, while this town has done a great job of operating 5 elementary schools and keeping the educational environment good there, it has underfunded its capital improvement budgets over time and has accumulated a significant amount of repairs to the total of $67 million. And while you don't have to spend that tomorrow, the time to spend that will be imminent. Okay. Opportunities and constraints. Let's start with Charles Wright alphabetically. So here you see GIS image of Charles Wright, and you can see an excerpt of the previous spreadsheet. The hardest thing about the Charles Wright site is its access to the street. It only has about 300 linear feet of frontage along Knott Road, and that's very hard to get what really should be at least 4 curb cuts, 2 for cars inbound and outbound, 2 for buses inbound and outbound. It's also very tight to the street, so even if you can get the cars to come off of Knott, there's not a lot of queuing space on that site for the traffic, so that's really hemmed it in. Nevertheless, I would point out that the site for Charles Wright is a pretty good building site and has that big lacrosse field in the back, which represents from a building standpoint, not as a parent of a lacrosse kid, as a building standpoint, an excellent opportunity for a construction site. With the exception of the dip in grade along its eastern edge that follows Wright, it's relatively flat, and there's no wetlands. So it represents a fair amount of acreage that you could construct upon, or that you could partially demolish and renovate on top of. In considering the constraints and opportunities of every site, we also considered, is this a candidate for building upon while occupied? And is it a candidate for a swing school? And I'd like to just discuss that real briefly. Obviously, in a comprehensive elementary school construction program, it would be most advantageous to create a swing school, right, where you could move kids into it so you're not trying to do construction either right next to them or on top of them. So that is, when you're considering doing something across all 5 sites, we would urge you to look at a swing school opportunity. In absence of a swing school, you're likely going to spend more money and you're going to take more time to do the work. Also, building while occupied is an excellent opportunity for any district to take advantage of, as long as you can do it safely. And to do that safely, you need to be far enough away from the kids to not disrupt them on a daily basis, and to keep that operating in an orderly fashion, as well as keep the construction traffic wholesale moving away from the kids. I joked last night to your community, as a 53-year-old man, I'm still drawn to construction sites, but you can imagine how a group of elementary school kids would similarly be. So, with regards to building while occupied, we think you could do that on Charles Wright, but you would never take the construction traffic back out onto Knott Street. That's taking a bad situation and making it even worse. So, if there was a way to acquire right-of-way across one of the adjacent residential properties, whether it's on Wright, Highview, or Oxford, we would say that that would be an important improvement. And in fact, your police department and fire department would think that that would be an excellent improvement to the site if you continue to want to operate an elementary school there. Mm-hmm. In other words, that provides an important safety valve to the operation of that site in the event of an emergency. That's not an automatic, but it would be an important distinction if you intend to build on that site while students are occupying it. And if it was a swing school, if you really intended to fully build on there and over the duration of a longer building campaign, operate one school out of the north end of that site and another school out of the south end of the site, we think you'll likely need to find further right-of-ways in order to continue to onboard now twice as many buses and twice as many cars. Perhaps even more than twice, because Charles Wright has so many walkers, it actually has fewer vehicular traffic, but that swing school will have full vehicular traffic because those kids will be coming from out of the neighborhood, right? So it would be very aggressive to do that on this site. Could you do it? Yes. Is it prudent? We could test it out.
So Michael, on Oxford Street, there are houses on like every part of that street. So there is not currently.
There is not currently an open site. There is a right where we have drawn that yellow arrow. There is a narrow right-of-way already for pedestrian traffic.
Okay.
It is not wide enough for a construction truck or a fire truck or an ambulance.
Okay, thank you.
But there are a lot of parcels that abut that long rectangle. So I'm not putting my finger on any one parcel.
Mike, I have a question. I was fortunate enough to teach at Charles Wright for 30 years and loved it.
Yeah.
One of my concerns, and still is that it's so community locked. In other words, there's houses all around it. Maybe not on Knott Street, but everywhere else. What about security? It bothers me that there is no land, that there are houses right nearby.
There's two ways of, yes, okay, that's a good concern. You could say the same thing about Hamner, for instance. But there's two ways to think of that. One is you want a perimeter that you can secure and monitor, but the other way to think of it is that's a lot of eyes on the street as well, right? You've perhaps got good monitoring. I think there are ways to design around it. In other words, Hamner pours in kind of like paint. That's a much tighter perimeter, narrower perimeter to maintain, whereas Charles Wright offers some opportunity to create good maintained buffers so that you don't have undesirables lurking right on the fence line. You'll be able to monitor it. So I'm an architect, so I have a lot of faith in the power of design, but it would be a concern that you don't have necessarily on the other parcels.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Emerson Williams. Emerson Williams is a large site, but interestingly enough, it is almost as constrained as Charles Wright. Its frontage on Wells Road, because of the hill that rises as you move west, really restricts the frontage. The rest of its perimeter is abutted by residential properties. So its in and outs are almost as difficult. Distinct from Charles Wright, Emerson Williams does not have a building pad sufficient to support construction while the school is occupied. It's limited by what I've depicted in red as steep slopes, which are expensive to build upon, and then in blue, the wetlands identified on the rest of that parcel. So it would be extremely difficult to build on this parcel while kids were in that building, and therefore is not a candidate for a swing school. You just couldn't do it. Could you renovate Emerson Williams? Absolutely. Could you tear it down and build new right on top of it? Absolutely.
Michael, within Emerson Williams, are there a lot of the underground streams that run through that back part of it? Is that part of what you guys have looked at?
That would be the wetlands, yeah.
Even in addition to the wetlands, and I'll be honest with you, I grew up right behind Emerson
Okay.
Williams, so this is my familiarity with it. But there's a lot of underground streams,
Okay.
which I remember had impacts with tool sheds, far different than a school. But Just didn't know if that was a concern.
Well, that topography is coming from somewhere, so if there's a prevalence of ledge and then the groundwater is essentially hitting the ledge and running down into the valley from there, that would be problematic to try to build upon. Now that, I'm not aware of significant foundation concerns with the existing school, so presumably you could build on top of that or do some selective demo and selective additions at Emerson Williams successfully, but I wouldn't go too far to the west or the east and expect improved conditions. Hamner, I'm going to use the same graphic for Hamner to discuss two sites. And so first I'm going to talk about the current Hamner site, which is on the southern tip there of the drawing. Hamner is like your third largest school, believe it or not, and it hides there in the middle of the block. It's a great interior block school, and I would describe it as being poured into that site like paint. So it's a significant square footage asset that's pretty well maintained. As constrained as it is, being in the middle of that block, it does have advantage of curb cuts on two public right-of-ways, and I think that's the main reason why it operates as successfully as it does, despite its constraints. So that is an asset to consider for Hamner. The site on Hamner is flat, and there are no wetlands. So as far as a swing school, obviously, or build on while occupied, there's no way you could do that. Every inch of that site is developed and utilized by the school currently. You couldn't find a building pad to build on there. And so therefore, it's also not a swing school opportunity. Across the public right-of-way is Standish Park, and that's another big flat open area that has some important assets. It has access to other public right-of-ways that are independent from where Hamner is aiming its traffic. Namely, Hartford Avenue is a good public right-of-way, and then that leads directly onto Knott Street. So if you were to utilize Hamner Annex, you could build while Hamner was occupied. You could build upon that site, and then you could operate a swing school at that location at the same time that you are operating Hamner. You would direct the traffic of the swing school to onto Hartford Avenue and up to Knott Street, and keep Hamner aimed towards the streets to the west and to the south. I would note that we heard public comment last night in which people passionately spoke about Standish Park. So my architect's analysis is about building pad and building opportunity, and not about the cultural resource that park represents. But there's good building assets to be utilized in that spot. Highcrest, its current access is problematic. You know that topography drops significantly off of Highcrest Road down into the valley where the current school resides. That essentially limits the curb cuts along Highcrest to two small curb cuts that you are currently using to bring buses and cars on board. There's significant presence of steep slopes across that parcel, and it is a valley, so it turns out in the middle of that site is a pretty extensive wetland. To the north of Highcrest, where you have the soccer and baseball fields, there is a good building pad, and access out to Highland Street could be achieved in that location. So could you build on this site while occupied? Absolutely. Could that become a swing school? Probably. I will note that Highcrest in the district sits by itself in the lower corner of Wethersfield. So if you thought about operating one of your largest current elementary schools, Highcrest, as well as a swing school out of that site for several years, you're going to put significant traffic demands on the corner of Highcrest and Highland, or I believe it's Highland and Colliers, which is the other street that goes to the north, because all of the traffic is going to be trying essentially to go to the north and east, exiting that property. So we would really have, again, talking about the power of design, we would really have to puzzle through that and understand what that means. Samuel Webb is...
Oh, Michael, I'm sorry, I just want to bring up, Keisha, are you bringing that up now?
Not yet.
Okay, it's at the end, okay.
You keep stealing my thunder.
Sorry.
It's okay. Webb is a giant flat site with good access to two main thoroughfares. It's got steep slopes on the far ends. I'd also note the reason that it's so flat is because it's an athletic asset to the entire town and athletic programs all the way up to the high school. So we want to understand, again, I'm looking at this as building opportunities, but I understand the value of these parcels beyond a building opportunity. So could you build on Webb while occupied? Absolutely. You'd take a field offline and you would create curb cuts likely onto Wells Road, and you could build on it while kids attended Webb. That could also be a swing school because you could direct traffic in a couple directions off the two long public right-of-ways. So here's some big conclusions that we came to. I won't say conclusions, I'll say takeaways, because we really don't have definitive plan forward yet. I'd like to reiterate, if you are considering doing a comprehensive building program, we would strongly encourage you to build a swing school as an important first step. We've seen this in other towns that we've executed successful comprehensive elementary school building programs with. The swing school is critical. So that opportunity and constraint exercise focused on that because we believe that that is probably your best first step. Talking about classroom environment and equity across the district, it is not possible to build 5 neighborhood schools that are exactly the same. That's just a function of the math of your enrollment. You can't divide the number of classrooms by the number of grades and get it to all be equal. So while we can endeavor to make each classroom environment absolutely the same, it's likely that if you're going to build across all 5 schools, they will be of different aggregate sizes. Some redistricting, therefore, is inevitable. Here, I want to distinguish between the idea of redistricting versus consolidation. Even without consolidation, you are going to change the classroom count and configuration in these schools, and you'll be moving the line slightly between them in order to accommodate that. Without doing that, the enrollment disparities that you saw in those white cells will persist, and you will have trouble adapting to the demographic spikes that you have across all 5 schools on any given year. In other words, on any given year, you'll likely have a classroom that has 28 kids in it while everyone else is running with 22 kids. So some adjustment, and we're not saying redistrict every year, but build these schools the same so that they're flexible enough to adapt to this. Do yourself a favor and reset on your demography.
Mike, I know this is a little early to ask this question, but there would be how many redistrictings if we do this large project?
How many redistricting? I guess supposedly 1, unless we pick something more interesting in which you may do a rolling one, and I can talk about that with some of the scenarios that we will present. There's some interesting nuances in the variations, okay? As I said in my opportunity and constraint, we have yet to find a school site that is without redemption, and that's not just me playing Superman architect. We think that all 5 of the schools have qualities that could either be renovated or built new upon. So there's no reason necessarily any of these sites are telling us that any one of these schools as a lost cause. Webb is the least likely school to demolish, and that's because it has significant real estate assets in the large gymnasium and auditorium that you would never be able to recover if you tore it down. The state will not participate in helping you rebuild an auditorium for an elementary school. The square footage just won't pencil out in that regard. So if you want to leverage that asset and keep Webb an elementary school, we would have to pursue what's called a space waiver, where in other words, most of the time the state is not interested in making districts tear down perfectly good real estate, but that is an ask that you have to take. And if you don't qualify for it, or if you don't qualify fully for it, when you do work at Webb, you may find yourself paying 100 cents on the dollar for some of the square footage that you renovate. In other words, the state will pull back money from sections of the building if you're building in excess of square footage that it deems appropriate. Therefore, Webb is an excellent renovation candidate, to say that out loud. Okay. Once you do that, once you understand that Webb is an excellent renovation candidate, and therefore not necessarily a good candidate for a swing school, because you don't necessarily have an interest in putting two schools on the exact same site, that really only leaves you two swing school opportunities: North Highcrest and the Hamner and Standish Park. So, with those takeaways, we put together some scenarios for you. We had a lot of ideas so I'm going to start from the bottom and I'm going to work my way up on these, because I know that you want to hear about Keisha Farm. So we had a lot of ideas that in our mind don't quite pencil out, and then we have some ideas that we feel have some legs underneath them. I'll also mention that in the spirit of that opportunity and constraint, we kept the enrollment numbers here flat to 2023. Your enrollment demographically will certainly stay flat. Unlike most towns in Connecticut, you are not depopulating your elementary school kids. But as Board of Ed members, you recognize that both in 2018 and 2022, a very good demographer told you that you were going to grow between 5 and 10%. That's probably true, and we'll have to bear that out as part of a new school construction program grant. Any of these schemes can be tweaked to accommodate that small adjustment, but just to isolate variables, we kept the enrollment more or less as it is today. So ideas that don't quite pencil out, we looked at the old elementary school that you're currently operating, community center. That is a smaller school, so it is not necessarily a very good swing school opportunity. The other issue with that site is the town has invested significant money in other community assets like the pool, for instance, that while that makes a great hub of community activity, doesn't necessarily play well with the educational daily life of an elementary school. So given that there's not a lot of space advantage in that parcel, and the current investments that the town has in its programs operating there, we don't see that as an opportunity. We looked at moving the 6th grade into Silas Deane and creating what is a more normative middle school or junior high. That is equally constrained. Silas Deane is packed to the gills right now as a building. We would have to build a new wing to accommodate the 6th grade, probably expand the gym space and the cafeteria space at a minimum, and really give it a shot in the arm for parking and traffic. To do that, we would have to take the fields, and that would then limit in perpetuity the middle school athletic programs for education, as well as for competitive sports. So it's just far too constrained for that. really, that seemed to us to be a non-starter. We also looked at building on the north end of Highland on the recently acquired Keisha Farm parcel, which does represent, again, looking at it from a building opportunity, as a pretty big flat site with good access on a couple of public right-of-ways. But that is, I think you as a community are still unsettled as to what to do with that parcel. And so it's not likely to be your best next step. Let's put it that way. And then
Can we talk about that a little bit, just
Absolutely.
briefly? So we own this property. I think it has, was it 30 acres? But because we're unsettled as a community, that, I don't know if I can address Russ and Sally and the rest of the building committee. Did we look into that, or like, how was that considered that we were just going to step away from that?
Well, I think it was determined that there's a lot of interest in that parcel for a range of programmatic options over the longer life of Wethersfield that would be precluded by putting an elementary school there. So until you can gel around a more of a master plan idea of what to do with that asset, I don't think the first step of this comprehensive plan should involve Keisha Farm. If
Because it
there's
could slow it
a
down because we're not settled.
consequential next step down the road, that would be a great opportunity.
And it's concerning, but I understand the predicament that you're in. And thank you for responding to that.
Great location, timing's a little rough on that.
Disappointing. Okay.
Okay, I'm going to start at the top now, to all the colored squares. Your first option is to build or renovate across all of your 5 sites. And essentially, you're going to replace each site with either a fully renovated or a brand-new K through 6 school. To do that, you would build your largest swing school, which makes sense, right? I don't think it has to be as large, we don't think it has to be as large as the 2022 effort, which had considerably large. Essentially, it just needs to be a 3 classroom per grade school of approximately 450 kids. That should be sufficient, more or less, to onboard all subsequent schools into that space. And then in any order, you would build another 450 kid school. And then you would build 3 smaller schools. In other words, 3 schools that more or less had 2 classrooms per grade, spilling out for a total of about a little over 1,800 elementary school kids. And you could do the lighter yellow boxes in any order that you wanted to. And then at the very end, you would return to the swing school site and you would tear down the nearest elementary school next to it. This would have you building on 5 sites, and it would take you about 8 to 9 years from essentially grant approval. In other words, not 8 to 9 years from where we are today, because we haven't even put the plan together, we haven't discussed a referendum yet, but when you got serious about it, you could do it in 8 or 9 years. The 8 to 9 years is important because we all recognize that time is money. The other option is to do very much what I just described, except you're going to replace it only with 3 other schools. So this would be consolidating on one site. You would essentially convert one site to some other purpose or shutter it for public education purposes. And there are a few advantages of this. One is that the 4 resulting schools would be all the same size. So that would be one way to achieve a measure of equity. And you can finish it 1 or 2 years earlier. Your whole program, you get done sooner. So you spend less money because you're only building on 4 sites and you're taking a shorter amount of time to do it. There there's a variation to each of these plans that are important and distinct. And what it does is it recognizes that Webb has certain space assets, square footage allocated to it existing that are of significant value to the community, not only to the Webb school, but to the entire public school and in fact the community. I would just stipulate that if you did get around to a serious renovation of the auditorium, that would be a tremendous asset to the town in general. So if you were to recognize that in its DNA, in the math of that building, it wants to be an intermediate school, you would commit to making that a 5-6 academy. You would send every 5th and 6th grader to a renovated and expanded Webb, where we would do a comprehensive renovation of that building to accommodate the specific needs of an intermediate school education. What that allows you to do is to build back smaller K through 4 schools across the other 4 sites. So in effect, you would be shuttering a neighborhood elementary school. The Webb community would be redistricted across the other 4 elementary schools, but everybody comes together at grade 5, which has some important, perhaps valuable aspects to it. And it allows us not only to right-size the classroom environment in Webb for that 5-6 curriculum, but also right-size the additional space assets that are already part of that building. That would still take you 8 or 9 years, right? Because you're building across all 5 sites and doing that. And Bobby, to your point, this is probably the scenario that would result in a rolling redistricting, because if you think about it, one way to do this would be to use Webb as the swing school, and once you put K through 6 in that school, you would only take back out K through 4. So the demographics at Webb would be a growing 5-6 environment, rather than pull 5-6 kids back and forth, right, across that building program. Not saying that's the only way to do it, but it is one consequence potentially of that would involve a rolling redistricting rather than a one-shot once you're done. Okay. There is also a variation where you could do this same program, but return back only 3 K through 4 elementary schools, effectively shuttering 2 sites, 2 neighborhood sites, right? Because Webb converts to a 5-6 academy, and you would be closing another site. What that allows, in both scenarios, the K through 4 programs that you're building back are exactly equal across the district. When you're building across 4 sites, you're building K through 4 schools that are about 325 kids. That's fairly small school. Whereas if you consolidated even more, you could build back 3 elementary schools of about 430 kids, about the size of Emerson, William, and Highcrest, essentially. So those are pretty good K through 4 schools. I'm just going to pause and kind of let that soak in a little bit.
Ask a question regarding Keisha for Highcrest. Would it be more costly or less costly to build on Keisha versus, I think you call it Highcrest North?
Okay. Well, across the board, anytime I recommended building on an occupied site, I was taking a field offline. And when the Wethersfield residents from Downs and TSKP were pursuing this project, they said, whatever you do, don't take the fields. But those are great building opportunities. There is an idea that if we were to build upon a field, we could return it in kind with the building pad that we ultimately vacated. So if we built on High Crest North, we could put the soccer field back in some reconfigured way into High Crest South once that building was removed.
Okay.
Keisha Farm doesn't have fields on it. It has a planting field, not a playing field. So there, you would not have to spend money rebuilding a field.
Okay.
So that is a savings. But Keisha's Farm is a completely undeveloped parcel right now, so we have to bring infrastructure to it. So I'm not sure how that would pencil out. That's a long way of saying I don't know.
Sure,
There are
that's
pluses
fair.
and minuses to Keisha Farm.
But this hasn't been considered due to the, to where we are as a community, that we're not settled on
At this-
Keisha?
at this-
Hasn't been looked at?
At this time, we have not considered it.
Okay,
I mean, the other thing, it was fairly recent planted upon, so we would want to do a soils analysis of Keisha Farm as well. I'm not trying to raise alarm bells, but you
Oh,
would
sure.
want to be diligent about it, to understand really what has occurred on that parcel.
it was recently planted on, I'm sorry, what does that mean?
Well, it was a farm. Its last iteration was a farm, I
Okay.
believe. I'm not from around here, but I believe that's
Okay.
the case.
Yep.
So we'd want to understand what has gone on in there.
Sure.
Whereas we kind of know what's gone on, I'll just pick Charles Wright. We kind of know what's gone on there. And you've lived by Emerson Williams forever, so, you know.
I grew up there.
Yeah, we have a, we
Now,
we have a, we have a good sense
Yeah.
there. Keisha Farm is an unknown, so,
Sure.
when we return to it, or were we to return to it, there's a certain amount of due diligence that we would need to do there.
Okay. I would like to talk about that further at some point, but I appreciate the discussion. Thank
Okay.
you.
I'll just keep on the big slide of opportunities or possible scenarios. I will also talk about perhaps an interesting discussion that we had with the professional staff today in discussing the ed specs. One is, I mean, there really is an issue that with any neighborhood schools, however many of them you operate, when you aren't actively redistricting every year, which no one's recommending that, but what happens is, on any given year, because of home purchases or babies being birthed, you get a large class that has to go through that school. And so if we just go back to the white slide, that 2023 largest classroom population, that represents like a big rabbit that school has to swallow, and it has to work its way through the school, right? Typically starts at K or first grade, but that has to pass through, and that is a demographic spike. When you have small elementary schools that are only 2 classes per grade, that's a pretty big rabbit for that school to absorb. And it creates a situation, for instance, in 2023, the largest class passing through Charles Webb had 28 kids per classroom in it. I suspect that class is graduating this year. That class had a very fundamentally different academic year than your typical kid at Charles Wright, who has 19 and a half kids per class. So when schools are small in classrooms per grade, that surge that's going to come from not actively redistricting becomes an issue. The other discussion that we had is that, and we can design around that. Again, Bobby, I think we can work around that. We can create opportunities in the ed spec to create a swing space, but nevertheless, that is going to be a persistent problem. The other discussion that we had is that when you're looking at teaching at a grade level, there's a certain economy and redundancy that occurs when you have at least 3 classrooms per grade that doesn't exist when you have 2 classrooms per grade. If a teacher is sick or goes on maternity leave, if there's a group of students that are together for 7 years, then they don't get along. There's only so many permutation that you can sort them into 2 classrooms that it becomes increasingly limiting over a 7-year elementary school education. If you have that 3rd year, you have much more flexibility. You have better teacher teaming and dynamics across 3 grades per classroom. So there starts to be some economy in operations when you take these schools at larger chunks. So that is another thing to consider. So that top bar that I presented, you would really have 2 or 3 schools that were the size of Webb or Charles Wright in that scenario. And those are 2 classrooms per grade. And that's what is a consequence of building 5 elementary schools. Okay? Yes, Bobby?
Mike, can I talk about the 5-6 school at Webb? At Webb? First of all, I went to a source that I would go to for any of these kind of questions, which is a 5th grade teacher. And she was filled with praise about these young 5th and 6th graders working together. They're doing leadership teams now, and she said they just rise to the occasion in this idea of being leaders. She also said teachers become subject experts for that age group, for that child development group, and for the subjects they have. And the more she raves about it, I asked, is there any town around? And I do believe Newington has the 5-6, is it 5-6-7? I'm not sure what they have there.
Do you know anything about that?
But the 5th grade is out of the elementary school.
Farmington does as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we definitely know Manchester. I was just trying to, I'm speaking off the cuff because there's so many school districts in the state, but in my 20 years of experience working sort of like a random Johnny Appleseed across the state doing schools, I would say that you're at least in the minority doing K through 6. That doesn't, I mean, we're all good Connecticut Yankees and we like to do it ourselves here. So that doesn't mean you're wrong. It just means that there's a current going in a different direction than what you're doing.
And can you tell me what Webb offers for this age group? I think you've talked about there's an auditorium that gets to stay.
Well, its gym, for instance, is much more robust than an elementary school gym. It's got a full auditorium, and with that, the music room assets that are more akin to what happens perhaps even earlier than 5th grade, but kids really start to gravitate towards an instrument at that age, and so the musical program. You're currently operating your pre-K program in what was formerly affiliated art spaces, either woodshop or art rooms, that represent space assets where you could teach a more robust specials program for the more developed kids. I'm saying that not to poo-poo the pre-K program, but I would say that if you committed the website to a 5-6 academy, it may not make sense to continue to operate the pre-K program from that site. I'm not trying to get rid of it. I'm just saying you would have to really think hard about what that meant for you as a district and from an operations standpoint, because the two will percolate at very different temperatures.
Can you speak to the difference in reimbursement possibly for an intermediate school versus an elementary school? Is there a difference in state reimbursement?
There's a, let's see. Just parsing the language a little bit, the reimbursement for any of these programs will be the same. On the base level, the state will participate with the town of Wethersfield on renovation projects at 56 cents on the dollar currently. That rate gets adjusted every year, but it never swings by a full penny. It may trend one way or another. If you built new, they'll reimburse 46 cents on the dollar, so it's a 10 cents penalty. So that's reimbursement rate. However, what we're talking about is eligible square footage, and what I was saying is based on enrollments, the state has an opinion about what the proper school size should be. It's not interested in letting all those Fairfield County schools build giant buildings. And that the state uses a rather complex formula, but one of the key determinant is the grade age of the students that are in that school. And what the state acknowledges is high schoolers require the most square footage, and kindergartners require the least square footage on average. So they will give you more square footage for a 5th and 6th grader per 5th and 6th grader.
Madam Chairperson, question? When all your talking visits, when you were out and about to all the different groups, which is great, what was the appetite for closing the school? Because we've heard loud and clear on one end, so I'm just curious what you heard in those meetings.
Everybody loves it until it's their neighborhood school. Because everybody acknowledges the savings that can be reaped from doing that. The question is, what is the value of that savings to this community? And is there something else that could be offered up of equal value in that proposition? And does that involve a 5-6 academy? I don't know. Does it involve some other programmatic feature or a better equity across your elementary schools? That's what I would say.
So you didn't really hear feedback from the public on that?
We heard lots of feedback. I'm saying that, in summary, I would say that our first question we often ask everybody we met, including the Chamber of Commerce, is what is it about your elementary schools that should be maintained or preserved in any comprehensive plan? And I would say, if not the first thing that came out of that group's mouth, the second is the neighborhood schools. Something that you could walk to. Even Highcrest, which has by far the fewest walkers. So that is, that has, at a minimum, psychic value to this community, right? So I'll just point that out. The other thing I'll say is that it's only fairly recently that Wethersfield has had 5 neighborhood schools, right? That's not in your town charter, and you used to have a lot more neighborhood schools. So we, nevertheless, are at a point in time where we have to evaluate what is that worth to you all.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation so far. I've been writing questions down as you've been going. You've answered pretty much most of them already, but I still have a couple that are left over. Was it ever floated, closing 2 elementary schools? Was that idea ever floated?
Well, we looked at that in a couple ways. The first way was just flat out to close 2 of them. And so if you look at that bottom bar, scenario E, that has the big red X,
Okay.
that's making no, and I'm glad you asked that question because I totally skipped that in this presentation. We looked at that and what it would mean then to create 3 equally sized elementary schools across 3 sites to be determined. Those are going to be large buildings, large to you, not large in the context of elementary schools in the state, but large nevertheless, about 600 kids if they are 3 K through 6 schools. So we discounted that because frankly you don't currently have 3 sites that can support 3 schools that size, swing school or otherwise. You have 2, I think, right now. So if we could open up another one with Keisha Farm or a player to be named later, we could put that back on the table. That's a 600-student school, and that operates, I would say, somewhat differently than what you currently have. The other way we looked at it is scenario D, which converts Webb to a 5-6 academy. So it doesn't close it, but it eliminates it as a neighborhood asset. It becomes now a community-wide asset. And then we close another site, TBD, to create 3 K-4 academies across. So you're still operating 4 buildings, it's just one is different than the other.
Okay. Another one of my questions was, correct me if I'm reading this roadmap, the timeline wrong. Whatever plans we suggest for you to examine closer, we would be getting final recommendations and cost estimates in February? Does that sound right?
That is what the building committee has put before us, and
Okay.
we're going to try really hard to meet that.
Okay.
I mean, the most important thing is to run this in such a way that people understand the decisions that we're making and why we're making it, and to coalesce around, if not a best solution, as quickly as possible, a range of best solutions, and then try to provide the detail that supports a conclusion around one of them. It would be great if we could do that by February, but if we need to take a little more time in order to make sure that we're diligent in sussing out the options and communicating our reasons for the recommendation, I think the building committee will see the value of taking the time to do that.
Yeah, okay. Not that cost is the most important thing, but on the scenario sheet, it does have them listed in order. It might matter what the numbers are. It shouldn't be the only thing that matters. That's all I'm saying. We would rather come to a conclusion for a plan that the town can agree upon. If it's the more expensive one, fine. But as long as it's not exorbitantly more expensive, you know what I mean?
Can I ask a quick question? Can you clarify again the reimbursement for maintaining and also to build new? Just to kind of like reiterate that per dollar that the state would give us. Can you just reiterate that? I just want to make sure I get I know that it doesn't make.
All right.
Right, so like for renovating, I think you said 56 cents to the dollar?
Yeah.
Correct? And then if it's from new, it's 46 as well, right? Or
If it's new,
if it was
it's
new.
40, it's 10 cents less, but that's on a comprehensive school construction program.
Is that difficult to do for the school? Like, would that be a difficult task to kind of sell that to the state to get the money as well? Because I think that financially, residents would be concerned about that.
No, I absolutely agree. I mean, a couple of things. The building committee has charged us not only to identify the total cost of these facilities, and in that, it's a complicated thing. It's not just the act of constructing, it's the act of operating them in perpetuity and what that means. But also, what is the total cost to town? Because nevertheless, it's going to be eligible for, at a minimum, some state participation, right? When it's a full building exercise, when it's a whole renovation or a whole new construction, the state will participate in that at those levels that I said, 56 cents on the dollar or 46 if it's new. The state will also hold back money for a range of things that it deems ineligible, but that's kind of in the noise level. Those are good rules of thumb to operate on. In the maintain-only scenario, where you're essentially, the state is highly incentivized to help you replace your roofs.
That's what I was going to ask, if
Because
it was
they-
going to not
Yeah.
make it difficult for the town.
They are highly incentivized to do that because they know the consequences of not doing that. In other words, it compounds in very serious ways very quickly. Similarly, the state is highly motivated to help you do security improvements to all of your schools. So they will participate in that at that same rate for those scopes of work, 56 cents on the dollar, excluding some ineligibles in the noise. But what the state will not do is encourage towns to defer their maintenance until they have an emergency. So there's a lot of maintain-only work that we can't find an eligible state grant program for them to participate in. You see what I'm saying? And at that point in time, the town bears 100 cents on every dollar that they spend to replace carpet. So that's why, in aggregate, when you looked at that one conclusive slide that said out of $67 million, you're going to pay for $56 million, that in aggregate, that reimbursement rate is far less because you're doing the work piecemeal. It's less work you're doing, right? In total, you're going to spend less total construction dollars just patching up the building, but the state will not partner with you to the extent that they would on a full construction endeavor.
Thank you. Anyone else? Jim?
I had a question. Can you just briefly go through, I know you have the costs rankings. Can you briefly go over what that range might look like for
What the total cost is?
3, 2, and 1, or do you have any type of estimate at all?
I think, in fairness to this board and knowing that this is a public meeting, it's premature to put a total cost on any of this. I mean, you can imagine like a 5-6 academy, not only are we going to have to look at what it costs to construct that, but you're going to staff the district very differently, right? So we're going to put some different staffing and operating demands, different busing demand on you, right? If you're creating another central location that you're sending all your kids to, your busing contract's going to run a little differently. Not that we're going to hone in to the penny on all of that, but it's a very different proposition. A lot of value there, but a lot of extra costs that we need to track. What we did do in that far right column for the committee was we eyeballed it in general and said, if you build across less sites in less time, it's going to tend to be your least expensive option. If you build over a longer period of time across all 5 sites, that's going to be your more costly option. And what's in the middle there is building in some combination across the sites with or without a 5-6 academy. I don't think those 2 scenarios will cost exactly the same, but we would have to give Downs a lot more information for them to give you some advice as to which one had more economy.
Okay, thank you. I just want another comment. I think what Christina was trying to point out is that, the repairs and maintaining is going to be, 10, 11, 12% reimbursement as opposed to 45% for new and 55% for renovation.
I agree. If you took that same $56 million cost to the town and put it towards a total construction project, you would be able to stretch that into some significant real construction endeavors because you get boosted by the state's participation by a far higher percentage. The other thing I'll say about that is not only are you getting good construction for that, but that's your opportunity to really offer new educational spaces, new educational program, new educational equipment. Because in the maintain only, you can't access any of that.
I know that that would open up some STEM opportunities and things like that. There's some grants towards that. So I do know that would maybe perhaps help Wethersfield to push that forward a little bit.
Okay.
So I know that that's something that happens in other districts.
And it would also give us the opportunity to enhance safety and security. Am I correct? In terms of the design?
In that maintain-only option, in the maintenance-only option, we included significant improvements to the schools to bring them up closer to contemporary standards. State has pretty thoughtful school safety standards on new and renovated construction. So that work that we presented in that $67 million, we would be doing pretty good lockdown protocols as well as school access. And in some instances, like Webb, which is very hard to get a good, secure, monitorable entrance because of topography and because of its extensive perimeter, that is a significant number. That would be a significant construction endeavor, but that is in that Webb number. That Webb number represents that.
Okay, any other questions? Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I gotta keep going. So, I might say the word maintain here a bunch of times, but bear with me. So, for maintain only, we would receive the lowest percentage of a reimbursement rate, and then we as a district would bear the brunt of maintaining those maintained schools 100% going forward. They're costlier to maintain than a brand-new school. How long would maintained schools last until we had to maintain only them again?
Well,
Great question.
that's a really good question.
Think how to word that.
I don't want my answer to be impolitic. There are anything that the state participates in, like the new roof. I'll pick on Emerson Williams for a second. So in that Emerson Williams number, there's a roof replacement number, and that number is calibrated to a scope of work that the state will participate in. In other words, the state won't give you money to patch your roof. They'll tell you, all right, if you're going to replace a roof, you're going to do it of a certain quality. So that repair, if the state's participating in it, you would expect to have a minimum of a 20-year life on that improvement. So there are certain core improvements in that maintenance-only budget, like roof, like windows, like the central plant, or the main electrical backbone, that you could expect to have a significant, at least 20-year life on. And your current boilers that you're working on have far exceeded 20 years. So you're on your 60th year on some of them. So there is some longevity there. But that is deferred maintenance again. And I'd just like to point out, it doesn't replace this very many ceiling tiles in most instances, doesn't repaint a wall, doesn't repair a lot of your doors, that sort of thing. So you would continue to have an obligation for capital improvements on an annual basis, which we heard time and time again from the public. The town's gotten very good at keeping kids going to that building in a safe environment with a significantly underfunded annual town budget towards capital improvements. That doesn't necessarily represent your best way forward. When you renovate as new, comprehensively across the building, your design team and contractor will have to provide whole systems, top to bottom, that have a minimum of a 20-year life. So that represents pretty much a hard reset on your maintenance culture. And of course, when you build new, that's the same. And I just real quick, I don't want to denigrate renovation as new or renovation projects. I think if you go to Windsor or Manchester, you can see what a fully renovated school can represent. It is a complete re-debut of that real estate asset when we're done. And in fact, at Manchester, the last 3 of those 6 schools are now net zero. So they're among the highest performing energy efficient buildings in all of New England.
Okay.
Questions?
We have another question?
Are we at the point where this, like, you made a comment about that the state does not encourage towns to defer their maintenance and put themselves in a, I don't remember how you described the state of
I don't either.
where we are, but are we there with the state?
Well, I can't comment what the state will or will not do at this point in time. I will tell you that the budgets that we presented, we feel you will have to do in some order in the next 10 years. So you
What's the
can
best
divide
investment?
that by 10 and adopt it as your capital improvement ongoing maintenance, or we can do something else and try to get some better value for the costs that you will have to incur.
Thank you. And, I wanted to say thank you so much for all the work that went into this presentation. And I really appreciate the open dialogue that we were able to have. I know that the public would like to hear more of that as well. And while this special Board of Ed meeting was fantastic and people can, dial in, or I still say dial in, but showing my age, but they can at least get to a part of that. I know the building committee meetings, I do not believe they are live streamed. I don't think they're recorded. Is that a fair statement? Am I allowed to address? Okay.
You can address me, because
I can address you.
the microphone.
Okay.
They are not recorded. I believe this is the only room that the town can provide this dial-in service.
Sure. And well, I think that, looking, if we consider the support that we're looking for from the town, so many, great discussions taking place about this, I think that would be helpful if we could make it available to the town, to, if they can't attend the meetings, to at least hear what's going on, the talent that you've put together on that building committee and the discussions that take place. I think it would only help, make this more transparent. In addition to that, I don't know if we can talk about this at the upcoming Board of Ed meeting on Tuesday, to give our townspeople a chance to provide public comment, because I know we don't have public comment,
Right.
in this particular meeting. And I also think it would be helpful at some point to learning more about how safety is addressed. I believe that's a very big concern of our parents and all townspeople, making sure that our children are safe. And just, I know obviously the safety plans we cannot discuss within the public, but I do would like to hear, like, what are we doing these days? How thick is the glass? What is the glass? Is it glass? Just those different things that we can share with the public to make sure that they know these new plans have a significant, top of mind security and safety program. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else I'd just like to say that at this point, we're no longer going to defer. I don't think that there's even an option anymore, is to keep this maintenance as part of our life here in the Wethersfield schools. Losing my voice. But I would like to have the building committee go further with these projects and find out exactly where we're going cost-wise, what are some of the obstacles that are in our way, and continue to tell us. So I would love to look into the 5-6 school. I think that's an absolute must. We do want to be a contemporary school system. We do want our children in the best places they can be in, and I think that's something that has to be investigated. And other than that, I think the rest does come down to cost. How much does that Plan A cost when we renovate all 5 or build as new with the 5 schools? So that's what I'd like to present tonight, and if everybody else would agree. I don't want to do any more maintenance. This is ridiculous. This town has done it that long. We're going to have the largest Band-Aid in the Connecticut area here, in the central Connecticut area. But what I would like to see is to investigate what we have here and what we've asked the building committee to investigate, and to keep doing that. Agree? How are we doing here?
Poppy, does that mean that we won't vote on the preferred options? We want them to continue?
We're going to have no
Discuss
motion
it?
tonight. We're
Okay.
gonna just
Okay, thank
have
you.
them continue the work that's been going on.
Okay, would we vote on our preferences on Tuesday or at some point in the future?
Well, we could. I think we need more information, though, on maybe cost.
Well, we're happy to give you more information, but we will also be very grateful for any feedback you give us along the way, because that will help guide us through this. Obviously, any one of these options, once you get into the nuts and bolts of it, have a lot of different threads you can start to pull at. And and it all culminates to nothing if it doesn't have the support of the professional staff and the Board of Education. So it would be great if you could help give us some guidance, and we will follow whatever wind you put in our sails.
Yeah, and I think, again, to the point of the 5-6 school, we had the opportunity to meet today and spent about an hour and a half, almost 2 hours, a very productive time. From a perspective of us, from a school district being able to do it, a 5-6 school, yes, we can absolutely do that. There's no doubt about it. I will say also, you had mentioned preschool. Preschool is obviously something that it's a focus of our school district. And a 5-6 school, it's certainly not really conducive to have preschool there. In addition to that, remember at Webb, we also have multiple special ed programs as well. So we're looking at, where preschool would be. It will still be in the district. It is still part of our, framework of what we provide and our special education programming as well. But looking at that school, and we were just in there this past week for instructional rounds, and we talked about it. It is designed to be a junior high school. So there's a great deal of potential there, and it's something that we can certainly address. So,
Russ, thank you.
Good evening, Madam Chair, Superintendent, and board members. You all know me, Russ Moran. I'm the chair of the Advisory School Building Committee. And, it was a terrific presentation. These folks have been doing a great job. And, I listened to all of your questions, concerns, comments, and some of it is almost cart before the horse. I hear what you're saying, and we, because Kate is with me and Doug is with me as well. We would like those answers as we go along. What we're hoping to hear from all of you is, oh boy, don't do that, right? Because we don't want to spin our wheels. These folks are working hard.
Of course.
But I don't want as a committee to direct them to do something and then have all of you throw up your hands and say, that's absolutely horrible for the kids of this town or the people that live here. Liz, you brought up a lot of good points, and one of the things I heard over and over and over again, I think I've been to most of your public meetings because I want to hear what people are saying as well. And, the talking of transparency, we can always do better. I think it's something we as a committee are very sensitive about. We're trying to get as much information out as possible. We're constantly talking with my town liaison, Sally Katz, on make sure, can we get this on the website? Can we do that? Trying to get people as many opportunities to participate in this. I think once we whittle things down and come to you with something more concrete, those discussions, are going to bloom. People are going to hear it. And whenever I go anywhere, I talk to people, please reach out, give us your concerns. So we are really sensitive based on what happened a couple years ago with a referendum that failed. And there's no reason to throw stones, there's no reason to anything, but like in history, you'll try to learn from it. What can we do better? And every day, so when I hear your comments, gets me thinking, what can we do a little better to help bring this along so the residents, and like tomorrow, we're going to meet with the seniors. People say, well, because we need to talk to them. We need to hear what their concerns are. Try to get, we're talking about this holistically for our whole community. What can this do for your property values? What will this do just for the benefit? Do businesses want to come to a town that seems stagnant and unwilling to support public education? So there's a whole host that goes with it. These guys are great, and ladies. They do, I use that as a term, but they come out and they are engaged, and they're going to guide us as we go forth, but we have to give them direction. And we're getting close to that point. That's why this meeting was so important, so we can hear from you, the experts on educating our kids, and help us to narrow our scope down as to what we need to do and what we're going to bring forth. We're going to have to do it with you. We're going to have to do it with the town council. And, I just, I run into Jim probably 3 times a week at D&D. And, it's almost uncanny, but it's something that, I encourage him. Jim, if you have questions, ask any of you. Pick up the phone.
And I have asked So
Yes.
thank you.
Yes, exactly. That's what we're all here for. So we look forward to working with you further. We look forward to presenting to the Board of Education a much more complex and specific plan. And we'll do everything we can to try to get more participation. But we thank you for holding this meeting, and we have a lot of work to do, and we'll be starting tomorrow.
Oh, Russ, you and your committee, thank you. This has been a lot of work. You brought a lot to us, and I think we're all very happy with where it's going. And decisions will be made. And we're here to make this a much better school system, just physically, a
That's the goal.
much better school system. Go ahead.
Just, you know, it was, sorry.
Uh-oh, that wasn't meant for me, was it?
No. I took pages of notes on top of just having the slideshow available to us. And I understand what you're saying right now, but is there more or anything else from us at this point that would be helpful to you?
I mean, at this point, as Mike said, we're really, if you wanted to say absolutely don't look at this,
Yeah.
that would be great. But as a committee, short of you not saying that, as a committee, we're kind of hearing at least a consensus that there is an open-mindedness to looking at a 5-6. So that gives us the ability to start directing the consultants to start presenting a couple options. And the committee really has to sit down, and there's a working group that's done a lot of work. Kate is involved, Rich Sitnick, and Brian DiCiaccio, and they do a lot of vetting for us. But we're going to have to bring everybody together. Our meetings will start getting like board meetings, maybe 2-3 times a month. But right now, I think we have a pretty fair understanding where you all want to go, and we're gonna get there.
We all set?
Who needs a holiday break? Honestly,
yeah.
that's all I'm thinking. Not me.
Any questions for Russ before we will adjourn?
I just had one
ahead.
quick comment. Thanks for all of the work from the building committee, and I appreciate Bobby, you giving us a little bit more time to
I think we need, yeah.
mull this over, because I wasn't prepared today to make a decision, and I wasn't aware of the the feelings about the 5 to 6 academy. So that was something good for me to be aware of.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you, everyone. We appreciate you.
Very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Michael.
We all set? Any other comments? Okay, so I make a motion that we adjourn this meeting.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? This meeting is adjourned. Thank you all. Good night.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.